Welcome to the Into Novus Knowledge Agronomy Podcast, your go-to resource for agronomic insights, technology solutions, and ongoing education. At Into, we combine agronomic expertise from soil analysis to best practice application methodologies to provide a holistic view for your yield optimization. Our focus is on practical strategies that improve efficiency and drive better results in the field. Join us for interesting discussions, expert advice, and the latest advancements shaping modern agriculture. Whether you're in the field, on the road, or at your facility, we're here to keep you informed and ahead of the curve. Welcome to the N2 podcast. Today joined with my counterparts, Derek Cottrill, Northwest Missouri, Rodney Phelps out in Illinois. How are you guys doing today?
Great.
Doing good.
Yeah, a little bit unseasonably warm, at least here in central Missouri, stringing together a few days in the mid 60s before we cool back down again. And yeah, I guess maybe just kind of go around the horn as far as what's happening in your geographies. For some of us, there's more happening than normal this time of year. Rodney, I don't know if you want to start us out.
Yeah, we're unseasonably warm, and it's we could use some rain, um, and we've started some anhydrous ammonia going on, going probably too well. And what I mean by that is I don't want, I could see some guys getting some weird thoughts on blowing some beans in the ground, but for us that's early, but unseasonably warm and unseasonably dry right now.
What about you up there, Derek, Northwest Missouri?
Yeah, a lot of similarities to Rodney. He kind of alluded to it too, but this warmer, unseasonably warmer weather is getting guys to at least start thinking about putting things in the ground. We're still a few weeks out, but we did a couple days ago. We were able to start getting some more gas in the ground. It looks like it's going to cool down this weekend, but then warm right back up. And so things will be coming pretty quick. And, when we talk about having plans in place, we're kind of at that 11th hour here to start getting those in place because spring's going to be here pretty quick. But we're unseasonably warm, and it looks like it's going to potentially stay that way for a little bit. And as always, we could use some moisture. I don't know if we're as dry as Rodney, but we'd take it if we get it.
Well, yeah, for us, it has been obviously the same way, unseasonably warm. We were starting to kind of dry out after we had that snow. A little bit of things happened in pockets, a little bit of dry went down, a little anhydrous here or there, but then, yeah, we were in that band of rain this weekend. And so, yeah, anywhere from half inch to an inch, depending on where you're at. So it's kind of got things shut down for now, but 20-mile-an-hour winds yesterday and mid 60s again today. There might be some stuff happening before too long again. But yeah, you guys are spot on, unseasonably warm and a lot of stuff happening more than normal this time of year. With that said, I think, Derek, that's probably a good transition. And, just talking about the warm February we've had so far, winter annual weeds continuing to grow in fields that didn't get a fall application or fall residual. I guess maybe you want to talk a little bit about that, as far as these temperatures aiding winter annual weed growth, what that means for our spring plans coming up.
Yeah, as far as weed control goes, that's winter annuals are becoming on fast and hard here because twofold. Not just are we warming up early now, relatively speaking, but I think they got off to a good start last fall as well. So especially if you didn't get a fall herbicide down, you're gonna want to be, having that plan in place and be expecting here potentially just in 2 or 3 weeks, going out with some of those earliest burndown applications. Northwest Missouri hit some of its warmest weather of the year in September last year, which is a little early for winter annual germination and emergence, but October and November weren't unseasonably cool either. So there's going to be a lot of rosettes out there, especially fields with heavy residue, where good yields and things like that were. They're there waiting for it to warm up, and I think they're going to take off faster than what you might think. The other thing to remember is our planting dates keep moving more forward. Type of thing is, late March to early April now seems like when we're rolling. And some of those chemistries, in order for them to work on, some of those flush of winter annuals, we need them to be undisturbed after application for a good week or two. So this time of year with burn down, it can be tough because there's a balance, between temperature and weed growth and things like that. But I I just have a plan in place because I think we're going to have, the hen bits and things like that showing up pretty quick here over the next couple of weeks if our temperatures stay like they look like they're going to, at least for the next 10 days or so.
Good points, Derek. What about you, Rodney? Got anything to add on that?
Yeah, just beware, and like Derek said, at 55 mile an hour driving by, the fields look clean, but when you actually stop and get out in there and kick the trash back, there's there's stuff just waiting there, like Derek says. So, and the other thing I'll say on burn down, um, especially in a year like this, make sure you have the good rates and full rates in that, but put a residual in with that burn down so that you give yourself some time on the backside. So you're making a trip out there anyway, and you've got to add chemistry. Make sure you get a residual in there, so that you're making that trip valuable and you're buying yourself some time if and when the planters roll, so that you don't have to be right behind that planter if need be. So that'd be my only add on, is make sure you put a residual in with that burn down.
Well, and Rodney, I think that's a good point too that I didn't mention when we talk about residual. Some of our burn down type herbicides actually have a decent amount of residual depending on the rate you use. The newer one, or the new news is sounds like Dicamba is going to be an option again this year. That's a good example of one that obviously got to use labeled rates, but depending on the rate you use, has a significant amount of residual. Take some of our PPO contact type herbicides, and there's a few of those that have some burn down activity, but you use the full rate like you said, and now we're talking pretty good residual as well. So I guess when it comes to rates, remember there's a burn down component with some of these, and there's also a residual component if you're to up that rate. But Rodney's spot on with getting that residual in there because we seem to have a compressed spring more and more, and our windows to start clean are becoming shorter. So by having that residual in there, it buys us flexibility, right?
Yeah, I think those are good points, guys. And you think about something like Valor, generic Valor. I mean, that doesn't add much cost at all, and that'll give you some residual to get there. I think maybe just some other points to add. Just when you start talking about making applications, Derek, within the next couple of weeks, and I guess I'd be all on board like you are. When I was a grad student, I did a bunch of work looking at early spring herbicide applications, Roundup 2,4-D and some residual stuff. And my takeaway, that's been a lot of years ago, but my takeaway from that was you run good enough rates of things like Roundup 2,4-D, don't skimp on the rates, use good surfactants. And even in less than ideal conditions, it'll eventually kill the stuff. It may take forever, but it will eventually kill it. And I guess that's where I've always kind of leaned to is I'd rather take small weed size in general, anyways. I'd rather take small weed size than super ideal conditions. And so if I can get on it early, I'm going to take that chance over waiting and waiting for super ideal conditions and then have winter annuals that are out flowering and about to hit maturity, which become harder to kill anyways. Now there's some caveats to that, like things like annual ryegrass, et cetera. But in general, so my thing would be just be sure you get on it early. Don't let them get out of control. I don't know where your guys' thoughts are on the whole temperature thing. I've always felt like we want temperatures to stay above freezing at application or after application. Depends whose work you might look at. They might say 3 to 5 days after application, you want it to stay above freezing. And I've always kind of felt like the day of application and the days following application way more important than the days leading up to application. So yeah, if I can get above freezing the day of application and 3 to 5 after, I'm going to take that. You guys have hit on the herbicide rate thing. Like, yeah, don't let people try to skimp on 2,4-D rate or Roundup rate, and we're kind of less than ideal conditions. Just don't skimp on those rates. Go with a decent rate of that herbicide, and then yeah, we've all three of us sat through an adjuvant training here about a month ago, and yeah, there's a lot of takeaways from that. But one thing we definitely hit on in that training for sure was AMS, and be sure you run a glyphosate, be sure you're running plenty of AMS in those less than ideal conditions, especially if we're going after a grass cover crop. I mean, it just helps with the translocation, et cetera. So yeah, I think there's several points there that we could talk about and think about. I don't know if you guys want to add anything to that or not before we move on.
Yeah, Nick, I will. You just mentioned cover crop. So quite a bit of cover crop in my geography. And cover crop now with this heat is really going to take off and could get big on you. So make sure that you have the rates, you have AMS, you're getting coverage, keep the application rate up, because cover crop, we want to get it terminated. And your ryegrasses are especially the ones that can be a little tougher. Um, you wouldn't think that, but they are. And so just make sure you get good coverage, you get good rates, you use an AMS, and you're getting on it timely to get those terminated.
Good points, Rodney. So Derek mentioned Dicamba earlier. That might be a good segue into big news with Dicamba approval coming for over-the-top use here a couple weeks ago. Might be a good point just to fall into that. You know, how we think about Dicamba and the burn down, or maybe the over-the-top use in
Yeah.
season.
Yeah. So yeah, recently, like you said, we got federal registration for certain dicamba products to be used over the top again for the first time in a couple of years. But where I think there's going to be some of the most value there is where it comes into the early spring burn down portion. Dicamba being highly systemic product, it's good on our winter annuals, our perennials that we might have out there, and it does bring some residual component into the mix as well. So just another option or tool in the toolbox there to use. Now, probably to no one's surprise, it's going to come with probably more restrictions than say some of our other chemistries that we're using. And so, my best advice: consider it if it's another option to use, but also make sure you consult with your local retail partners, your basic manufacturer partners on some of those restrictions, because I do know it's probably going to be pretty tedious like it was a couple of years ago. But each individual state could have their own certain parameters and things like that. But again, that's more over the top type use. But here, as we move into early spring burn down, I think that's where it's going to bring a ton of value for some growers to have another option besides the glyphosate, the 2,4-D, the things that we've been using the last couple of years.
Yeah, I think those are good points. You know, when it comes to other dicamba formulations that are not the three approved, I think you alluded to it earlier, but you're still limited to the label requirements on that label. So if you're using something that's not one of the top three approved, then you still have to adhere to the plant back, the moisture restrictions, all that stuff, just like you always had to. But with these three new formulations that have came out, the Ingenious, the Striax, the Tavium, those products, there is approval for over the top use. But you hit on it very well, Derek, which is there's a lot of restrictions there, a lot of potential restrictions, and more than probably we want to go into. But you know, things like the maximum use rate got pulled down. There's a temperature piece to it now. There's volatility reducing agents. There's drift reducing agents. There's a whole lot of restrictions that go with it. So yeah, you nailed it. You better be sure you fully understand what all those restrictions are, and that you have all the proper approval, like the training, et cetera. If you're doing your own applying, or if you're going to have a retailer do it, be sure you guys all understand what those are, because there's a lot. And then, as you mentioned before we started this podcast, like each state could potentially impose more restrictions, and that's still left to be determined which states are going to, which ones haven't yet. So, a lot of things in the air. And I think the point behind all that is just be sure you fully
Well,
understand what all you're getting into before you do it.
right. And Nick, even like I mentioned, we haven't used the last couple of years, but even 2 years ago, whenever we had a label for it, it was still tedious then. I'm not saying it's any worse or better now, but it really comes down to planning, having a plan in place. The only way you can get around some of those restrictions and make sure it works for your system is to not be making last minute decisions on what you're going to use. But honestly, that's a good idea with any of our management plans that we have. And so, again, for anybody, my best recommendation is have a plan in place now, and don't begin thinking about it later.
Good points. Rodney, do you want to add anything or not from an Illinois perspective?
No, and I'll just go right back repetitive. Lots of restrictions. So make sure you know per your state what your restrictions are. To Derek's point, have a plan and just make sure you know what's legal and what's not, so you don't paint yourself in a box like we've had in the past.
All good points, guys. A lot to think about with that recent approval. There's a lot to it. With that said, I mean, it's not really not really a great transition, except we're talking about soybeans, I guess. But to flip it to one other kind of new approval from this fall, we could talk a little bit about Victrado seed treatment, but I think maybe a setup to that, Rodney, would be talking a little bit about red crown rot. And I know Illinois has kind of been the epicenter of it. You guys have been so generous to share it with us here in Missouri too. But I don't know if you want to start out and give us a little background on red crown rot.
Yeah, so a new one, we've got crown rot in corn, and then misery loves company. So here comes red crown rot in soybeans. And I'll be the first to admit I probably misid'd it a couple years ago when I first saw it, and I misid'd it as Southern Death or brown stem rot. And because the symptomology of it is identical to those two diseases, but when you start looking at it, you've got the reddish oranges at the crown, just like it says. So we need to be very cognizant of it because, especially in Illinois, because we have it now. And so it's very, I'm glad that we have a seed treatment that has come out that we can help with it. We got to remember too that seed treatments aren't the silver bullet and don't solve all the problems. You still have to have varieties that have a good disease tolerance package. You still need to treat things as you would in any disease triangle. So I'm glad we've got a new seed treatment. Um, but also remember too that you have to have all your other fungi type treatments with the seed treatment. So, this is just one piece of a good seed treatment on a soybean.
Yeah, those are good. Those are good points. To your point about the identification, that's what makes it so difficult is the foliar symptoms can look just like SDS or just like brown stem rot. Those three all cause that interveinal chlorosis and necrosis eventually. So that makes them difficult. If you find the reddish orange, I think they call them microsclerotia or whatever at the base of that plant, those red fruiting bodies, you'll know it's red crown rot, but those don't always not always appear, not always there. And my take is anymore, if you want to know for sure, probably the best way to do it is to send a sample into the lab to know for sure what you got, because those can be pretty confusing nowadays. Yeah, you guys had it in Western Illinois. It's spread over into Eastern Missouri. Derek doesn't have much of it yet, or that he knows of, in Northwest Missouri, but it's even stretched as far as South Central Missouri. So it's all over the place, and there's probably more of it out there than what we even know about. It's probably spread across most of that map by now. But it does move through soil. So just kind of like SCN, you move soil, you're going to move red crown right around. And so it won't take long for that to be everywhere or in every field. The Victrado piece is interesting. That got approval, I think, back in November. So it's a seed treatment from Syngenta. It's the first one that's federally registered that has red crown rot control on the label. So before we had Saltro and Oliva, which had some 2EE labels for suppression of red crown rot. This was going to have control, and they actually show some pretty good efficacy too on SDS and soybean cyst nematodes. So better control maybe even than what Saltro and Oliva are now. Plus we get red crown rot control. So definitely something to take a look at, or maybe ask your supplier a little bit about if you have the ability for Victrado seed treatment, especially if you're worried about red crown rot. It might be something to take a gander at. Derek,
And
I
and
don't know
I'll
if you. Oh, go
and
ahead.
I'll make a comment, Nick. Sorry to cut you off there, but now is when beans are starting to be treated. So this is something when you're hearing this from us, it's don't wait because a lot of the beans are being treated as we speak and will be in the next 30 days. So make sure number one, it's available. Number two, if you want it, that you get to your retailer or the person you're buying seed from so they can get it on the seed for you.
Yeah, that's a good point, Rodney. Derek, do you have something else you want to add on this topic?
No, I mean the identification piece. The way diseases work, whether it's corn or beans, they don't pick favorites and things like that. If you and Rodney got it in your territories, I probably do, but we haven't been looking for it. We sure have a lot of SDS and brown stem rot and some of those things, but if you're not out looking for it, we probably had some mistaken identity. Same thing as tar spot and southern rust and corn. If you look at those conformation maps of what county gets highlighted first, it's not because it's in one and not the other. It's because that's just where somebody found it and confirmed it and sent it in. Like Nick said, the best way to get it confirmed is to send it in. And so I hope it's not in our area, but if we're being realistic, and just the way every other disease has always worked for us, we probably need to plan for it too. And Rodney made a really good point because I know it's going to start ramping up here in my territory as beans are starting to get treated. And so what do we do about it? It goes back to the importance of a full spectrum seed treatment like you were using already, your fungicide, insecticide, but then some of those additionals that are going to provide, whether it be the red crown rot, SCN, our nematode package in there as well, and the SDS, those additions to our base seed treatment, I think are going to just become that much more important. And if I was sitting on an acre where, I was on some of my higher yielding beans, as we start treating beans here over the next couple of weeks, I'd probably be looking to get some additional treatment in there, to avoid the situations. Because with all these, while they're diseases, just a reminder, we can't do anything with our foliar fungicides on them. So we get our one shot here with the seed treatment. And when we miss that and we see the symptoms late in the season, it's a hindsight 2020 deal. We should have done something about it earlier. So just have a plan in place, just like we were talking about on the Dicamba side of things. So
Yeah, great point as far as it being just a root disease, so we can't control it with foliar. And yeah, I do want to emphasize Rodney's point too on the seed treatment on the normal fungicide. Like yeah, Victrado, or even if we were talking about Sultro and Olivo, those protecting against things like SDS, SCN, and the case of Victrado, red crown rot as well. You still have to have your blanket seed treatment for the other organisms like Phytophthora, Pythium, Rhizoctonia, those kind of things. You're still going to need your base seed treatment. This is just going to be in addition to kind of like we've been used to with Levo and Sultro. So good points, guys. With that, any last parting thoughts from you guys?
No, I guess I'll say make sure you have a plan. And we've talked about this in a lot of our podcasts coming up to this, but now's the time. Plans should be starting or already, pretty baked, but make sure you have a plan and stick to the plan. And and on seed treatment back on beans, corn, same way. Make sure there's some options in corn seed treatment. Just make sure now's the time to get it because once you put it in the ground, it's too late. And so make sure you have a plan, work with your seed person and your retailer, and make sure you have a good plan and you follow the plan all the way through.
Good points, Derek. You got anything last parting thought?
a lot would be repetitive because Rodney was spot on there. If there's one just reminder is I know this year, every year we get into the spring and it's a reset button type deal, but don't forget about the challenges we experienced last year or that you may have experienced last spring and things like that. Again, going to be a new year, but is there anything we can do right now to avoid some of those that we consistently see next spring, but we maybe don't always remember that going into a new spring. We kind of hit that reset button and forget. So part of having a plan is to remember what the years prior were and are there some easily avoidable things. So
Yeah, you guys all made great points. I'll just add that, 26 is it's kind of looks like a rough year financially again, and sometimes that can be somewhat depressing and makes folks want to just seize up like an infant and not do anything. But yeah, to your guys' point, just remember we still got to be planning for next year regardless. We still got to have a plan put in place. So let's not totally stick our heads in the sand. Let's be sure we're looking forward a little bit. So appreciate it very much, guys, and thank you guys for listening. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us. This podcast is brought to you by Into Novus Knowledge. Please reach out to your Into agronomist if we can help in any way. Join us next time for more in-depth agronomic advice.